Hello, welcome to Missy's Imaginings. The next portion of our project is to do the smock overcoat or overshirt that could be for artistry or gardening. In our case, I am making these for the Hogwarts outfit, so this is the herbology coat, but it could be any type of an art smock or anything like that, or just a fun big oversized shirt. So the pieces include the pockets, the collar, the front and back facing, sleeves, and then the gathered front and back. Now I've already got my lines marked on these pieces. I don't know if it'll show up here unless I get my hand underneath. So I am going to be basting along those lines from one side to another, just basting each line on the back piece, on the front pieces, and then I will take that measurement and match it against the facing curve right here, because it needs to be gathered tight enough to fit into the curve of the facings. So I'm going to try it. This is the pieces that I have done up, and I'm going to sew it as is so that you have an idea of how these patterns will turn out sewn as is. Now, another way that you can do this is if you decide to use pin tucking. So you can use pin tucking or smocking, which I have not done myself, but I did buy a book. So there are books available, and this one I found at a used bookstore, and so it has somebody's name in it, and it has lots of examples and text on how to do it, and then once you have the smocking done, how to do like the stitching on it. So that's another thing you could do. I believe from looking at the examples in this book that if you do want to do the smocking, you're going to have more fabric than my pattern pieces contain. You're going to have more room this way, because the way the fabric is gathered, it's lots of exact little measurements, and this is not going to be that way. So you may need to cut a line here in the pattern piece, extend it to whatever measurement you need for the smocking, and then insert pattern paper between those two pieces, and then cut out your fabric. However, I'm not going to do that. So just another option. If you do know how to do smocking and you like that look, then that's just another option that could be put into place here. But I am simply going to be basting on all of these lines and then gathering it together. I will also say that on this fabric, I've used fabric marker that you can wash out, because I know chalk sometimes is harder to see, and depending on the color, it can be hard to remove, or it brushes off as you're working. So I wanted lines that would stay in place a little bit better. So I used a fabric marking pen that the marks can wash out. So you can get them at probably Michael's and Hobby Lobby. I would say Joann, but we don't have that anymore. And maybe Walmart. Walmart might even have them in their crafting sewing section. So that's what I used to make these lines. All right, so this will be part of my pre-sew. If you've been to the channel before, you know that I always tend to pre-sew a lot of my stuff, and I don't show that on camera because it's simple just to tell you what it's going to be and then to get it out of the way to save time. So smocking those or gathering those will be one. Next, I'm going to overlock or serge the top of the pockets, fold them down and hem them, and then I will be pressing all the edges in so that the pocket will be finished all the way around. So I need to get the top of those pockets done and get those pressed. The facings will be sewn together at the shoulders, and then once it's sewn at the shoulders, I will overlock or serge all the way around the outside edge of my facings, because that will show in the finished project. And then I will also stay stitch around the neckline and then probably clip in the curves to that stay stitching, and the same thing in the neckline of my main pieces. On the sleeves, I will overlock or serge the hemline, turn it up 1/4 inch and hem it, and then I will do double line of basting across the top so that I can gather that a little bit for ease stitching and to fit it into the armhole. Then on the collar, I'm going to sew around the outside edge of the collar. Then I will trim away excess seam allowance, turn it right side out, press it, and then I will stay stitch the bottom together, and then I will clip the center back so I can match it on my shirt. So that's a lot of the pre-sewing or prep sewing that I need to get done before we start assembling the actual garment. So when that's done, I will come back to the camera. First, we have the sleeves ready. So the hems are done, and I've also gathered the top edge to have some ease there to be able to fit it into the garment when it's time for that. The collar is done, so I've top stitched this edge. Whether or not you top stitch is totally up to you, and then I have stay stitched here, and then I've also clipped to the stitching in increments of about 1/4 inch apart, which just makes that easier to fit into the garment. Okay, then we have the little pockets prepared. So the hem is done on the top edge, and then these side and bottom edges have all been pressed. So I have both of the little pockets done. Then we have the facing is put together, so it's sewn at the shoulders, stay stitched and clipped around the neckline. I've pressed the seam allowances open, and I did not overlock or serge these edges because they will not show, but I did do around the outside edge as we talked about, because that will show in the finished garment. So that is ready. Then we come to our smocking. So I have a couple things that are not totally done, but just as a way to demonstrate how we go about this. So let's move a couple of these pieces out of the way, and let's go ahead and get our camera closer. I've stitched along all of those lines that we talked about, and on one end I went ahead and got all this side tied. Now I just left the last one because I thought I'll go ahead and show kind of my preference in securing this end of the stitching. I've tied them all on the inside of the garment because I don't want any knots to show on the outside. This blue line, of course, will disappear once the garment's done. And I can't remember if it's heat removable or if it's I just wash it out. I can't remember, but one of the two. If the iron doesn't take it away, I'll use a little bit of water. So when I'm securing these threads, I like to loop the thread twice. Some people call that like the beginning of a fisherman's knot. So rather than just looping it once, I loop it twice, and I pull it not super tight, but just down to the bottom. Then I do that again, and I loop it twice. We'll get that going around. And then I don't, again, I'm not going to pull it super tight on the second one, because all of this is meant to be gathered. So there's a lot of give in that thread, but now I'm going to do it a third time, and I'll loop it twice again. And on this one, I'm going to pull it a little more snug. So that way I have a triple fisherman knot that secures this end of the stitching, and I know that it's going to be nice and tight and secure. It's not just going to come out over time. Then when I'm ready to gather these lines, I go through and pick up just that last stitch and then use the thread so I can lift up the loop from the front and bring that thread to both, so I have both threads on one side of the fabric. And sometimes the loop will be where I can already see it, but if not, you can always bring up that loop by bringing up the thread. So we're going to bring all the threads to one side of the fabric here, and it doesn't take very long, so we'll go ahead and do that while we're on camera. So I'm just lifting up, and here that little loop, oh, there we got it, okay. And so sometimes if it's hard to get that loop to come to the surface, you can use, by pulling the back stitch up, getting a hold of this thread, you can lift that loop up. So it's just a little technique that sometimes if fabric is really thick or your thread wants to grab a little bit and it's hard to get that first loop up, you can just lift up the top thread from both sides of that stitch and then pull it up. So there we go. We have all of our thread. One more, if I can get my tweezers in there. Okay, so now with all of our thread to the same side, my preference is I am going to pull the thread that is on the top of this side of the fabric, and that's the one I'm going to use to gather my pieces. So I'm just going to pull that, and I am being careful because I've only got, you know, one piece of thread here, but I'm going to pull that snug to gather. And then I tend to I like to pull all of them before I start tying them, just so that the difference between the tension on this line is not different from this one, and it just makes it a little bit easier if I've gathered all of them a little bit first before I start tying off the threads. So that's what I'm doing next, is I'm just pulling all that smocking so that I've got it gathered on each line. There we go. And they will, because I started my stitches on the same side each time, they gather pretty evenly, which you can kind of see as I'm pulling this. My gathering is pretty even, but see how this kind of then loosens a little bit towards the end, but it gets a lot of the gathering kind of done before I start tying. So we're just puckering those up. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I thought, well, it is something that we've never done on the channel before, so I'll just go ahead and show how I do this part. And gather this one. So see, it's going pretty quickly. It does take a long time to sew all the seams and then to tie off on the one edge before you start the gathering process. So do be prepared. It is a tedious process to do, and don't be surprised if it does take a long time. There, I guess I got that one tight enough. Then we'll do the next one. So doing all the little knots does take a long time, and it does take some dexterity to do like all the loops that I choose to do. And I just like that because I know that, see how I'm gathering against that and I'm pulling against that thread, I know it's not going to come untied because I have really nice secure knots there. So here we go. We'll get, all right, so now it's time to start tying off. And I will start down at the bottom end. And again, I'm going to pull the one that I used to gather. Make sure that's all in the nice spot. Now, my tying is a little bit different when I'm going to start securing the gathering. And I do have a reason for that. So when I'm going to secure the gathering stitches, because it tends to kind of want to pull out, I'm going to only loop it once the first time. And that's because I've got these threads looped, and I don't know if they'll even show on the camera here, but I can loop and I can pull it. I can kind of hold with my finger and then just go ahead and get that one first little knot, kind of to hold the fabric from stretching out before I do my double loop. If I do the double loop right away, sometimes some of the gathering can come out, and because I've double looped it, it's hard to get that back where I want it, and then my loop is too far away from the end of the stitching, and it can be looser than I want. The gathering can be looser. So because I want it nice and tight, the first knot I do is just a single little loop, and then I do the second two with the double looping, and then we'll kind of angle that out. So that gets my first one anchored, and once I have it tied, I'm going to go ahead and trim that at about 3/8 of a seam allowance, or not seam allowance, but 3/8 left on the thread there. So now we'll get these threads out of the way, and we're just going to repeat that process. So again, I'm going to gather, get this nice and tight, and remember, you've only got one thread here, so don't pull too tight because your thread can break. So I'm going to do one loop on this first one, because that allows me to make sure the fabric is where I want, and then if I needed to tighten that up, it's a little bit easier to do that. Then we're going to go ahead and loop twice again, pull it in, loop twice again, there we go, loop it twice, get it tied, and then trim off the thread, leaving about 3/8 of an inch there. And then I will continue that process to all the way to the neckline. Then once that's done, it's going to look like this on the right side of the fabric. So the gathering lays on the top of the fabric. Let's get a little bit closer to the camera, like so. So this is the back side where we tied all of our knots, and then this is the front side. And then I'm going to pull this flat and press it so it will end up looking like this. So this is what our smocking will look like once that's all completed. So there's our steps and how I get the smocking done on the fronts and the back piece. So these two, this one needs to be pressed. This one is my finished product. This one needs to be pressed. And then I'll go ahead and finish up the smocking on the back piece. And then we'll take a look at how we're going to start putting this together. With all of my smocking done, the next step will be to put the patch pockets on the front pieces. So I'm just going to kind of decide where I think I like them and where they're out of the way of the smocking folds. So they're going to be a little bit lower than the smocking. Maybe that looks about to be an inch or an inch and a quarter, and then maybe about an inch away from the other edge is about where I'm going to place these pockets. And to sew them on, I'm just going to measure, get them where I want them. then I'll pin the pocket down, so then I will sew and top stitch at the same time to apply the pockets to the front. So once the pockets are on the front pieces, I will then put the fronts and the back together at the shoulders. So there we go. So I'll do that. And then once the back and shoulders are together, the pockets are on, then we're going to take a look at applying the collar and the facing. With the shoulders attached on the garment, my next step will be to pin in the collar with, and these are both the same fabric on both sides, so we're going to have the collar sandwiched between the right side of the garment and the right side of the facing. So I'm going to match up the center back of the collar and the center back of the garment and pin there. Then I'm going to bring this out towards the side and pin on my collar and then pin on the facing so that that collar is sandwiched right between the facing and the garment. Then we'll sew around the neckline, and then that will have our collar inserted into the garment. It looks like my gathers might be a little bit tight, so I will be working a little bit to work in this collar edge, and I may need to gather that. I'll give it a little bit more of an ease to fit in this neckline. So we'll see how it goes as I go ahead and pin these together, and then we'll come back to the camera. The collar is now attached. I went ahead and basted it on first. Then I put on the facing so the collar is sandwiched in there. I also folded back the edges of the collar to make sure that none of the collar gets caught in the seam that I'm about to sew next. So to put the facing in, I'm going to sew across the bottom, up the front side, around the neckline, back down the other side, and then across the bottom. And that will insert the facing into the garment with the collar already in place. And once that part is done, we'll kind of open it up and take a look at what we have. So now the collar is in, and the facing did end up being a little bit big, so there is some puckering here at the neckline, but it's okay because I had to gather the collar a little bit as well. And I think the reason is because I forgot when I was gathering all this that I needed to fit it to the facing and make sure that I had this part big enough. So I probably gathered the back a little more than I should have, but I was able to get it all to fit with a little bit of puckering and gathering on that facing and the neckline. So now I'm going to continue to clip some of this seam allowance in towards the seam so that it will go ahead and lay a little bit better. I need to get my scissors to where they'll snip here. There we go. And it's a lot of layers of fabric, especially with all that gathering. So we're going to kind of snip this seam allowance just to make the corners turn a little bit easier. There are a couple lumpy spots that I'll get rid of. There we go. And just kind of snip to that seam that's holding it together so it can lay a little bit better. So we'll do that and we'll get it pressed and get all that to lay down. See, there we go, and how much nicer that lays now when you snip that seam allowance so it doesn't pull so bad. And then these aren't wrinkles from the fitting, but they're just the continuation of those smocking gathers. So once I get this all in, get that snipped and get it pressed, now we'll put in the sleeves. So to put in the sleeves, I will open up the armhole of the garment, and then with right sides together, I will do, usually this is the same procedure I do in any video to insert a sleeve. I like to gather up the sleeve, and I usually pull the threads on the right side of the fabric, and I just like to get it kind of puckery, gather it up there, and gather a little more from this side. There we go. So it is clearly smaller than the opening, but then what I like to do is I start from the outside edge of one side and I start pinning the raw edge together. There we go. We'll put the first one in, and I'm smoothing the fabric as I work towards the top of the shoulder. And my method for doing this is to have some ease at the bottom, but then also if my sleeve is a little bit bigger than the arm opening, because I want to have enough give in the fabric for it to fit well, then by doing this method and starting at the outside to get it pinned, then I can smooth out the fabric and end up with any gathers or any excess fabric will remain at the top of the shoulder, which is where I would want any puckering to be, because you don't want to have puckers under the arm. So that's why I always start from the outside, because the outside edge is the underarm of your garment. So I start from the outside edge, smoothing upwards towards the top of the shoulder, just pinning as I go. And also, when I need more sleeve, it's easy to then gently give it a tug, because I didn't anchor any of those gathering threads, and I can smooth it out, fitting that sleeve into the armhole. So here we go. We'll get this one done. Then this side. So as you can see here, as I'm smoothing this out, I'm ending up with any gathers by the time I'm done. If there still are any, they will be worked all the way up to the shoulder, and then my finished garment will look nice. So there, we'll put in this side. And so as you can see, I just keep going from one side to the next, adding pin by pin. Now I'm getting right up by that top shoulder seam here, and then I'm going to smooth any remaining puckers up towards the top by that shoulder seam, and put in my last pin, work those puckers right up to the shoulder, and then I will add this pin. There we go. So we have a couple little, but it's not even a lot of pucker. It's just enough that it's kind of an ease at the very top of the shoulder that can probably kind of smooth out if we give it a nice little tug. And there we have the sleeve pinned and ready to sew into the armhole opening. So that's kind of my method when I sew it. And then I do sew with the sleeve on the underside when I feed it into the machine, because if there's a couple little gathers here, the feed dogs will help feed those in evenly. And at the same time, I can make sure that on the top part, which is the garment part, not the sleeve, I can make sure I don't have any puckers left in this part. So that's how I put the sleeves in. So we'll get the sleeves done, and we'll be almost finished with our smock. And now we have most of the shirt put together. The last little bit that we need to do is I will turn it inside out, and I will start at the cuff of the sleeve, or the hem of the sleeve, on each side, and so from the edge of the sleeve to the underarm, and then come down the side seams like so, and then I'll hem it. And once I got it hemmed, I will go ahead and turn it right side out and add the closures to the front, and then we'll see how it looks on the doll. Here is the finished result of our little smock overshirt for the herbology class, and any type of an art or pottery class, or yeah, anything you'd need a smock for, I suppose. But I'm very happy with how everything turned out in the front. I do really like it. Then we'll swirl her around and take a look at the back. So the back smocking looks like this. And then I kind of pull her. There we go. Pull that out a little bit to see a little bit better. And so this little smock shirt is above the heavy sweater as well, so it's kind of bunching there where it's bunched over the stand. There, so we can maybe pull that down a little bit more, get a little bit more of a smooth look. It's a little bit more smooth, but yeah, so that is the back of the smock, and that's how it fits. Then I did just put in 4 snaps. So if we undo the snaps, then we can see there still is the sweater underneath there. So there we go. And I'm making her a little bit unsteady there. But yeah, I'm very happy with how it turned out. I wasn't quite sure. The smocking is kind of a new thing, but I do like how it turned out. And it's pretty much how I envisioned in my head. So that's how I put it together. The next item on the list that I will actually show is the school robes. So we can start on that next. I probably won't show a video on the shirt, like sewing the white button-up shirt or the stockings, because they're in several other videos. So I probably won't do those. But this smocking is new. And then the cape, or
robes I haven't shown on camera, so we'll go ahead and get that sewn up as well, and then that will finish up her garments. So yeah, there we go. Enjoy and happy sewing!